Welcome everyone to our Wednesday Clearview Library series with CSU Extension. My name is Allison O'Connor and I'm the horticulture agent in Larimer County.
And I'm Amy Lentz. I am the horticulture agent in Weld County.
And Amy is our fantastic presenter today talking about water conservation in the garden and landscape. If you're new to us or unfamiliar with CSU Extension, we are the outreach arm of the university. And so what we do is give you information that you can use in your everyday life. So what Amy and I focus on is gardening and homeowner education. We also work with HOAs and do several other things. All of our information we present is research-based, and so we give you the facts and then give you options to let you make your own decision that's best for you and your family. This is a monthly series that we do with the Clearview Library. Next month, in September, myself and Ken Kawamara, who's the town forester in Windsor, will be doing a session on replacement trees for ash. So emerald ash borer is becoming more common in our communities. I don't believe it's been confirmed yet in Weld County, but it's certainly in Larimer and further south into the Denver metro. So you can join us to learn about replacement trees. Will be great even if you don't have ash, because you can learn all about shade trees for your landscape. And without further ado, Amy, I think we are ready to go. So thanks, Amy, for being here. And if you have questions, please type them into the chat and I will keep up with the conversation as best I can. So thank you, Amy.
Great. Okay, so let's get started. Today we're going to talk about water conservation in the garden and the landscape. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through different parts of the landscape. We'll talk about water conservation in the lawn. We'll talk about how to harvest water for your garden beds. And we'll also cover some low water plant selections. And then I'll finish up with the vegetable garden, since a lot of us have vegetable gardens going right now. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off my camera as well, just to save on bandwidth. And let's get started. So I want to start out by covering some interesting facts about water in Colorado. Colorado is considered a semi-arid state, and we have about 8 to 15 inches of precipitation per year. And this really depends on where you live. It can even be a county to county difference. So here in Weld County, we average, I think, 11 to 13, but just, one county over in Boulder, they get upwards of maybe around more like 15 or 16 inches a year. So even just a little bit of difference in elevation or location can have a big effect on how much water you're getting. Regardless, 15 inches, even if you're getting the max that's shown here, is not enough to have a nice lush landscape unless you're using water smart plants. The average Colorado household uses almost 50% of its annual water supply to water the landscape outside of the home. And so you might be doing a lot of things in your home to save on that water, but really you need to think about the outdoors as well, because there is a lot of water to be saved in your landscape. Increasing population, which we all are seeing, is definitely going to be putting more of a demand on our water supply. And you can read about this in the news. Lots of things are happening and things are changing. There's more reservoirs being built to accommodate our increasing population. So if we can, on a personal level, start to lower our personal water consumption, collectively, we can have a huge impact on how much water is needed to supply our population. And then finally, a well thought out water smart landscape plan can reduce that outdoor water use by as much as 60%. So if you're using half of your water on the landscape and then you can cut that in half, you're overall saving somewhere between 25 and 30% of your water use. So that's, again, really an area where you can make a big impact. So here's just a quick chart to show you the differences between some of the towns that are located around the Windsor area, since we're talking with Windsor Library today. So like I mentioned, in Boulder, they're getting more water because they're closer up to the foothills. They're getting a little bit more of that rain. 19.7 inches per year. In Greeley, about 14.5 inches per year. Same for Longmont and Loveland, you're getting a little bit more as well. So just know it can vary just slightly from place to place. So I'm asking this question of why should we be water wise? And we talked about cost savings, and that's great. Saving money is always really good. But we also need to think about other things, like what is the water doing? What kind of an impact is it having on our land? And really, most of us live in urban centers. Even if you live in downtown Windsor, you're still kind of in an urban environment on a smaller scale. This picture here is actually from NASA. It was taken from the International Space Station, I think a couple years ago. And this is downtown Denver. And you really don't see a whole lot of green space there. So I want to also consider what's happening to the water that we are using on our landscapes. And we'll go into that in the next slide. So again, you can save money, but you can also use a lot less of that water, which is a precious resource that we need to really protect. So when thinking about these urban centers that we often live in, this is where I want us to think about what happens to that water. So you'll notice on the two charts on the far left that in a normal in a normal land situation where you have either meadows or woods, no production happening, you're gonna get about 1/2 inch of every 3 inches of water as runoff. So 2.4 inches of that, or almost, it would be like almost 4/5 of that would go actually down into the soil. And so it's there provided for your plants and for the grasses and the vegetation that needs it. As we start to manipulate the land, even if we're just growing crops like the row crops in the middle chart there, you can see that we start to get more and more runoff. So for row crops, you're looking at about 1/3 of it running off and 2/3 infiltrating into the ground. But then look what happens as we move into our residential neighborhoods and into our urban districts. Gosh, when you move over to the urban areas with the buildings and a lot of pavement and a lot of impermeable surfaces, you're only getting 1/2 inch of that 3 inches of water infiltrating into the ground, and 2.5 inches is going as runoff. So not only do I want us to use less water in our landscape, but I want us to try to help get that water that we are using to infiltrate into the soil. And we can talk about, we're gonna talk about rain gardens and water harvesting in a few slides. And that's how we can really start to redirect that water and not have it just all going into the gutters. So I wanna start out with talking about the lawn, because really the lawn is one of those areas that we are watering frequently, and we want to have nice looking lawns. I'm not going to tell you that you should not have a lawn. I think there's definitely a purpose for lawns. If you have children or if you have pets, they really enjoy that lawn as a place to play and run around. And so there are circumstances where we love our lawns. So let's talk about how we can make our lawns more water efficient. So I love this picture just to kind of put that, bring that point home about, not wanting our water to run off. And you can see in this picture, these sprinklers are running and they are over-watering this area. It ends up in the sidewalk, it runs off into the gutters, and you don't want to be this guy. I think this is at an apartment complex, so probably a management company is running this, and I would love to see them lower their water use in this situation. So let's talk about some tips. The most efficient time for you to be watering your lawn is when there's dew on the grass. Think evening, think overnight, and in the morning. So anytime between 9 p.m. and 9 a.m. or whatever your local rules allow. Dusk till dawn is really how you want to think about this. You can water in the middle of the day. It's not going to kill your plants. I've heard people say, oh, is it going to kill my plants if I water in the middle of the day? It's not, but you're going to get a lot more evaporation. It can cause a little bit of stress on those plants. And then you're going to have a lot of loss in that situation. But if your plants are really starving for water and you get home at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and you realize that you need to water, go ahead and water. It's okay. Don't wait. So I just want to show, I'm going to talk in the next 2 slides what your lawn looks like when you don't have enough water, and then what it looks like when you have too much water. And I want to show both just so that you can recognize the difference between the two. So here you can see the picture on the left. This is a lawn that does not have enough water, and it's suffering from what we call Ascochyta leaf blight. It's a very common disease that comes in on the grass when it's drought stressed. But honestly, as soon as you start watering more consistently on that area, that Ascochyta leaf blight will just go away. But there are some diseases that will come in when your lawn is water stressed. You can also see stress tracking on drought stressed turf, and you'll see more weeds popping up that can handle that drought when your lawn cannot. And then the picture on the right there, this is a picture of a south-facing sloped lawn that's not being irrigated enough. And in that case, the damage is going to be more severe because it's getting more heat, and you'll have insects that might come in and start to take over, like winter mites. And that's what's in the picture there. So these are areas where you're not getting enough water, and you need to recognize this, because as you're reducing the water that you're using on your lawn, if you start to see signs and symptoms like this, that might tell you that you're reducing it a little too much. So too much water on the lawn, you're going to have a lot of indicators that you have too much water. Squishy turf, shallow roots, poor drought resistance. All of these are things that you'll see with too much water. You'll have a lot more soil compaction if you're walking on those areas. You also need more fertilization for that lawn because you're leaching those nutrients out every time you water. You can also see more rapid thatch formation. You may find more grubs in the lawn, more weeds. There are some diseases that come in when you have too much water, one of those being necrotic ring spot. I have, personally, I've gotten a couple calls in the last month or two of people that have had necrotic ring spot on their lawns because we're kind of in this hot, dry period of the summer, and so they're watering every single day, and they're getting these diseases come in because it's just too much water. And then finally, you're gonna have higher water bills if you're paying for that water on a per unit basis. And so in the upper right picture there, you can see the sprinkler systems, and this is a business where they're watering the street as well as the lawn. And so you may not be watering too much, but we also need to consider, are you watering the areas you should be watering? This is still wasted water, even though the lawn may be getting the right amount of water, or watering the street. So we want to conserve that and fix those sprinkler heads. So when you're starting to back off on the water use in your lawn, this is one way for you to tell if you're not getting enough water on. Look at your downspouts. So your downspouts are getting a lot more, where the gutter meets the lawn, that's getting a lot more water than the rest of your lawn when it rains. And so you can see here, the grass is nice and green around that downspout. And that tells you that, hey, the rest of the lawn would like a little bit more water too. So one of the main questions I get when I talk about lawns with people is, well, how long do I water? You know, how do what should I set my system at? And that's a really hard question to answer. I don't like to think of how much you should water in terms of time because everyone has different irrigation systems. And as you can see in the chart here, I've got 4 different irrigation systems being shown: rotary, high efficiency nozzles, which are really some of the better ones; fixed spray heads that just kind of pop up and spray the area with a fine mist. You've got rotor heads that move back and forth, and then just manual sprinklers. But the point here is you can see how different that time is. And so for me to tell someone, well, you should water 10 minutes or 15 minutes, that's going to be inaccurate because I don't know what the output of those sprinkler systems are. So it's going to vary greatly. And there's a better way to know how much water you should put on the lawn. So we're going to look at that in the next, I think probably in 3 or 4 slides from now. We'll talk about measuring in inches instead of time, which is more effective. Before I get to that, let's go through these different types of spray heads. So pop-up and fixed spray heads kind of just pop up right out of the ground. They apply a lot of water over an area in a short amount of time. With this type of sprinkler head, runoff is really common. I have these on the Inferno strip between the street and the sidewalk, that strip of grass. And I think there, you know, in that little strip, there's maybe 8 of these because of good coverage, I run these just a few minutes, maybe 4 to 6 minutes. But again, my output might be kind of high because I have so many heads in that area. So they put out a lot of water. Runoff, again, really common. They're the least expensive heads to install, so likely these are what the builders are going to be using when they put in your irrigation system if you buy a new home or a new build. And you can easily switch these out with better heads. Typical runtime, and again, put big, huge quotes around this because I don't know if this is going to be accurate for your system or not, but 10 to 20 minutes, 3 days a week. Rotor heads. So this is the type of head that pops up out of the ground and it kind of moves from side to side. It can go 180 degrees, it can go 360 degrees all the way around, or it can just do a smaller angle of an area. But here the key is that this applies water really slowly over a long period of time because of that movement through the landscape. It's giving time for that water to hit the ground and soak in before that head gets back to water that spot again. These are typically a little bit more expensive to install. So you'll find these, maybe in certain areas of your lawn. And typical runtime on these is going to be a lot longer because of that movement. You're only watering a section of the grass at a time. And so it needs a lot longer time to get back and forth and hit all those spots evenly. Then the last type of sprinkler head type I want to talk about for this class are the stream rotors. These are going to be the most efficient as far as water use is concerned. They apply water very slowly over a long period of time, and it's very uniform. So they kind of are like streams of water that move across the landscape. So you're still getting that movement, but the streams have bigger water droplets. So you're not going to have as much evaporation or loss due to wind blowing some of the other types of spray heads that put out more of a finer mist. So these actually work much more efficiently in that way. So how much do we water each week? Again, I said it's hard to talk in terms of time. I like to look more at inches. So, and this is typical for a bluegrass lawn, that in April, you're probably watering about 1/2 inch per week. An inch in May, maybe 1.5 inches June through August, and then in September, you're gonna back down to 1 inch a week. In the height of the summer, like it is today, here we are, August 12th, it's hot outside, it's been hot for a long time. I know I haven't seen rain at my house in a couple of weeks. A week like this, I may wanna put a little bit more water on my lawn, so even up to 2.5 inches of water. But the key here is to make sure that you're adjusting that amount of water depending on what time of year it is. So there's a chart there as well that shows just kind of the typical run times for sprays and rotors. You'll notice on that chart that, let's start at the top. Maybe you're watering 1 to 2 days a week in May, and then 2 days a week in June, and then 3 days a week for the other days in the summer, and then backing down. And at the same time, you'll notice it says 2 cycles of so many minutes. If you run a cycle and put on half the amount of water, give it time, let it soak in, and then hit it again with that second cycle, you're going to get much more penetration of that water deeper into the soil. Deeper into the soil equals better root systems. The deeper the roots then go, the more drought tolerant that plant is. And so it just kind of has a compounding effect, excuse me, on the lawn. Keep in mind what is normal. We don't really have normal temperatures in Colorado, so I want to make sure that we're watching the weather to see how things are changing in terms of temperatures and precipitation. It's hard to plan for what the year is going to look like in Colorado. Back in February, March, I feel actually maybe it was more in like March or April, hardly anyone was in a drought in Colorado. The southwest corner was in a drought. But here we are today, and 100% of Colorado is in a drought right now, some form of drought, whether it's minor to severe, but still, the point is it's hard to plan for what's normal around here. Make sure you have a good irrigation system, that you're getting good coverage. We're going to cover that in a few slides here coming up. And then again, keep in mind, it depends on what kind of irrigation you have in terms of how long you're going to water. So I know a lot of you have probably seen this picture before, but this is an example of how you do a lawn irrigation audit. And you'll see here we've got yellow cups spaced throughout the lawn. They don't have to be these yellow cups. You can use tuna cans, you can use cat food cans, or any straight-sided container or Tupperware containers that are all equal in size. And they've placed these out in the lawn in both good green areas as well as the areas that have the brown patches. You don't want to just put them in the bad areas. And the reason being is you want to compare what is different about this other part of the lawn that's making it look so good when this part of the lawn looks so poor. My colleague Allison, who is hosting today, her and Tony Koski put out this recent new fact sheet about diagnosing brown spots in the lawn using an irrigation audit. This is really great, and we'll include this in our follow-up email to you all to let you know how to do your own lawn irrigation audit with some easy steps. This is much more simplified than what you'll find from some of the other places. So when you're doing this irrigation audit, you're comparing the good grass to the brown areas. And so let's look at these two cups right here, and after running this system for maybe say 10 minutes, there's a 1/10 of an inch difference in these two cups. Is this a big deal? Yes, this is a huge deal, because after 10 minutes, there's already twice the amount of water hitting the good turf, green turf, as there is the brown areas. And so over time, this gives us a snapshot, but over time that lawn is receiving twice as much water as those other areas. So that's going to tell you, something is happening here. There's not coverage in this spot. And probably that's due to the irrigation head itself. So here's a picture of a big waste of water where the irrigation head is not popping up out of the grass. It's hitting the grass that's too tall around it, and it's not getting coverage to that area. So the reason I show this is because you might say, okay, well, if you didn't know that your irrigation head was damaged, you might look at your lawn and say, well, there's brown spots, I need to water more. And you really don't have to water more, you just need to fix your irrigation head. So we can save money and water by not overwatering these areas that we think just need more water. So this head is too low, and it's causing that brown spot. Here's another one where the head is barely coming out of the ground, if even. And so again, too low and a waste of water. And then here are some other pictures of heads that are tilted the wrong way or facing the wrong direction, watering the parking lot, or again, just buried. And so fixing your heads, making sure you have good, even coverage so that you don't overwater those brown spots is what we want to look for. And then the last point I want to make about how to care for your lawn is your mowing height. In order to get a good deep root system on your plants, on your grass plants in your lawn, you want to have a higher mowing height. So we like to think about maybe 2 to 3.5 inches, or just set it on the highest deck setting or the one just below that, and you should be good. But what this is going to do over time is it's going to make your turf less heat and drought stressed. So it's going to be more tolerant when we do get those periods like this week where it's just hot and dry all the time. You'll have fewer weeds, because weeds have the ability to reach the water where the grass can't. And so if you start to stress your turf out, those weeds are going to come in. And then finally, you have reduced potential for fertilizer leaching and runoff, because you're mowing higher, you're using less water, and those roots are deeper, and so they really can pick up that water better. And so, so that was it for turf care. If you want to completely renovate your turf, because most of us have Kentucky bluegrass, and you want to go to something that's overall just more drought tolerant inherently as a turf species, you can look at other turf alternatives. The upper left picture there is of I think that's Turkish Veronica or Creeping Thyme that they're using between pavers. That probably at one time was a lawn that they decided, you know, we just walk back and forth to the door, so let's put pavers in and use less water. The upper right picture is of a buffalo grass lawn. This is in the fall, and so it's a warm season grass. You'll notice that the grass is kind of yellow straw colored, and that's because this is during a cool season. The buffalo grass, being a warm season grass, is actually going to thrive more at times like this in July and August, and then it's going to turn a little more straw colored in the cooler parts of the year. So just know that going in. If you want to do some research or even get out and see what some of these different low water turf alternatives look like, in Berthoud at Northern Water, there is a conservation garden at the back side of the building, and that's what's in the lower picture here. And they have different plots of all these different types of turf grasses that you can actually see in person. These gardens are open to the public. You just have to walk around to the back of the building. And I think they're open now too. So how are we doing, Allison? Any questions on turf that I didn't, or that you didn't answer?
There were just a couple, and I think I got them under control. The clover lawn is still a very popular thing, and I know that Tony has better information on that. I think the biggest thing is that trying to plant it in a very healthy, competitive turf will not likely be successful. So just be aware of that. I know we do plan on adding a clover lawn to our new ranch landscapes up in Loveland at the fairgrounds when we get those gardens planted, probably by 2021. So we should have an example of that with tips on how to make it more successful.
Okay, great. And we can, I know Tony wrote an article about clover lawns. I'll see if I can dig that up and include that on the follow-up email as well. For those of you that are joining us for the first time, we always like to follow up our classes with an email with lots of different resources for you, along with a copy of the slides from the class today. So you will be getting these slides. Okay, so let's shift gears a little bit. Let's talk about how you can harvest water in your landscape or from your rooftop and then use it around in the garden. So we can split water harvesting into two different categories. We've got active water harvesting and passive water harvesting. Let's start with the active. So this is actually something somewhat new in Colorado. We have the ability now to have rain barrels on our properties. You can have up to 2 55-gallon barrels like you see here, up to a total of 110 gallons, maximum per building on your property. And they really want these attached to your residential home, not your shed or your garage or an outbuilding. They need to be on the main residence. But these are just basically storage containers that have a lid on them that you connect to your gutter and your downspout, and the water goes into the barrel and instead of going out the downspout. So pretty simple concept. They are located above ground. You don't want to be burying these in the ground. And outside of your residential home. The water also needs to be used outside of the home. You can't collect the water and then bring it inside to use. But it's used for collecting that water on single family homes or even multifamily units, up to 4 units per building. And again, that water has to be used on the same property that it's collected and has to be used outside. So you can see the diagram here of kind of how this works. I don't have enough time in the class today to talk about how to build one of these, but CSU does offer fact sheets on this. And so I would encourage you to read up on that. And I will see if I can include that as well in the follow-up. So one of these rain barrels can actually cover a pretty good amount of area. 110 gallons of water will cover about 180 square feet with water from the rooftop. So you can see water and money savings because of, you know, using this water when you need it. So you can store it temporarily and then release it onto the landscape. Or you can have it set up kind of in the picture on the right there, where it probably just goes into that barrel and immediately waters that area. So this is it's gonna really depend on a lot of different things of how much money you're gonna save or how much water you're gonna save. Depends on how much rain we get. So we haven't had a lot of rain recently. So rain barrels may not be effective right now. But again, they're good to have around for when that water is available. This can depend on the size of your rooftop, how much money you save, what kind of water, what kind of plants you're using to water, and again, that size of the area. One really great thing about rainwater is that it tends to be lower in salts and it's unchlorinated. So your plants really love when they get a nice dose of rainwater. So for passive rainwater collection, I think this is probably a little more beneficial in Colorado because we get rain, moving across our landscape at such a, how do I say this? It doesn't happen very often. So, we want to really use that water when it does come, and we don't want it to run off. So what we do with passive water collection is we just divert the water over the land into different areas to be immediately used by the vegetation that's there. So we use this term, slow it down, spread it out, and sink it in. And when we think about some of these big rain events that we have in Colorado, they can cause a lot of flooding. And by implementing these types of passive water collection systems, it can help us make better use of that water so we don't have as much runoff. So I'm just going to show you here in the next few slides a picture of each of these different types of passive water collection systems. So the one you see now is called a swale. This one spreads the water out horizontally as it moves down the landscape and hits these different contours. So it's just spreading it out horizontally. Another type of this is berms. These are also called microbasins, and this is where the water moves across the landscape and you've created a little pocket for it to collect in. And maybe once it fills up that pocket, it rolls into another pocket, and so on and so forth. I've created a few of these in my landscape, and they've seemed to work out pretty well. The next kind is a French drain. This one is actually going to move water a lot faster into a different location. And so it's more about directing that water away from maybe buildings or structures. But it's basically a pipe with holes in it that's buried in the ground and covered around with gravel. And so what happens is when it does rain really hard, that water will move quickly into that pipe and then quickly away from the area. So you can use a French drain to kind of direct water toward maybe certain areas that have more plants or more trees. And then finally, we have what are called bioinfiltration gardens. And this is just a fancy way to say rain gardens, where we've directed that water to that area and now we're going to build a garden around it that only uses that water, for survival. So you can do this on your own property. You need to take a few precautions. You need to make sure you're avoiding underground utilities when you're, moving any kind of soil around and trying to create these little pockets or these contours. So call 811 before you start digging around. Make sure you're a minimum of 10 feet away from your house if you're going to do a rain garden itself, because you're directing the water into that area and it's going to soak it down into the ground. And you just don't want to be doing that right up against your house, your foundation. And then also consider if you have a septic system, you also want to stay 25 feet away from your septic system, because we don't want to mess with the septic system's ability to break down, those biosolids. So a couple other tips for you on planning out your rain gardens. Don't place these directly under trees. Again, they can get pretty saturated at times, and we like to make sure our tree roots have oxygen. So we don't want to overwater those areas. Steep slopes are going to be hard for this. It's not really ideal. It's going to be hard to catch that water before it just runs off. And then consider where that overflow is going to go. Are you directing all of your water towards your neighbor's house? You might want to think about that before you start redirecting it. So I did this at my house. This is a little sneak peek of my backyard. I bought a new build house 2 years ago in Severance, and I don't know if there's any research behind this, but we like to call it the donut hole because it literally never rains at my house. But I watch the storms all around. So I really wanted to put in a completely low water landscape in our backyard. So we started with a nice blank slate. And what I did was I just kind of watched where the water was going. And you can see in these pictures the natural runoff pattern that these downspouts have taken. And I wanted to work with that because it was already moving water away from my house. And so I wanted to put a rain garden in along the fence area there. You can see the orange flags in that picture on the left. I did call before I did any digging. And honestly, I really didn't have to do a whole lot of digging with this because I was working with the natural contour of the land. So this is the after. You can see that I've just put large rocks into those depressions to help that water move more quickly and away from the foundation and into that new rain garden area. Those grasses that you see along the fence there in that left-hand picture are now taller than I am. They're about maybe 6 feet tall. So they're loving it, and I've literally never watered them. I watered them when I planted them. And maybe for about the first 2 or 3 weeks, but after that, I did not water anymore. So you can do this on your own property. It's really not that difficult. Again, I like to work with the natural landscape and how things want to flow. Here's some other examples of rain gardens that have been put on other people's properties. These can be pretty decorative. They can be incorporated into your landscape to look like kind of a natural stream or a dry stream. You can put a bridge over it for walking, all kinds of options here. And they can be really great. One of the things I want to mention for some other tips for your landscape itself are using what are called permeable pavers. We have a lot of impermeable surfaces around us, the streets, our rooftops. And if you look at a satellite photo of where you live, look at how much green there is compared to how much gray or brown there is. And that's really where water is running off. There's no other way to say it. Water does not soak into your street very well. But what we can start doing on our properties is using these permeable pavers that let the water go through and then get to the ground underneath. There's a lot of different options out there. The market on these things is wide, and you can find pavers to match any landscape style you want, really. Some of these will allow vegetation to come up in between. You can use gravel in between. They're not too terribly hard to install. You have to do a lot of work to make sure that the ground is level. But then you can, sometimes you can install these yourselves on a small scale. If you're going to go on a bigger scale, I would recommend having a company come out and do it. Here you can see permeable pavers used as a patio, as a complete driveway area, or maybe it's just off to the side where you keep your boat or your trailer or your RV or something like that, if you're not going to be driving on it very often. So look into these if you want to save. I don't know if it's necessarily going to save you water, but again, it's making better use of the water that we do get from precipitation. Any questions on passive or active water collection, Allison?
No.
All right.
Not that I saw.
Okay, let's jump into then more of the garden beds and the trees. So there's this concept out there called xeriscape. I've heard people say xeriscape, and that's okay. I mean, it's not xeriscape because zero means nothing, right? Xera, X-E-R-I, actually means dry. And so we can start to use some of these dry, heat-loving plants in our landscapes to create this more water-wise design. This picture you see in front of you is from Denver Botanic Gardens outside of the conservatory area there. And you can see all of these are low water plants that prefer it dry. And look how beautiful and lush this looks. So again, I just mentioned that zero means nothing, but xera or xeris means dry. This term xeriscape was actually coined in Colorado. It was a joint effort between CSU, the Associated Landscape Contractors of Colorado, and Denver Water. I think back in the 80s is when this program started to come out. And so it's kind of hits close to home because this is where we live, this high, dry, Great Plains, semi-arid desert. And so I like to embrace let's embrace it. And we can. What I love about xeriscaping is I feel like it has a very Colorado feel to it. When I look at a picture like this is from the Aurora Xeriscape Demonstration Garden. I don't know. To me, I'm from east of the Mississippi River, and it doesn't look like this where I'm from. This to me screams Colorado. So again, embrace the state and the landscape we have. There is a PDF available, and I will include that as well in the follow-up email, that lists out the steps of how you go about xeriscaping your own yard. And so there are 7 steps to this. Plan ahead, improve your soil, limit your turf areas, irrigate efficiently, select appropriate plants, use mulch, and maintain it. And there's a lot that goes into this, and I actually have a whole class just on xeriscaping. So I encourage you to look at the PDF that's available for that. I'm going to kind of touch on a few of these points or these steps. Let's talk about the step that talks about irrigating efficiently. For your grass, we already kind of covered this. Use those low volume, low angled sprinklers. Use the ones that maybe rotate with the fingers or streams of water like we showed in those pictures. You can also use a very similar type of irrigation in your landscape bed that has streams that come out of water that come out at a very low angle. For your trees, your shrubs, your flowers, and your ground covers, look into using drip irrigation or bubbler emitters. Those irrigation systems are going to put that water right where the plant needs it, and it's not going to water a whole big, large area that doesn't. So that's how you can save some money. And again, always adjust those watering times monthly to make sure you're meeting those seasonal needs. Another one of those 7 steps was to mulch the garden. And mulch is fantastic for water conservation. It can reduce your irrigation needs by as much as 50% because we have a lot of evaporation in Colorado. Our air is dry, and if where the wet soil meets the air just sucks that water right off the surface of the soil through evaporation. So mulch your areas. You can use a lot of different types of mulch to make things interesting as well. I really like these 2 pictures that show how you can use organic mulches like the bark, shredded bark, along with some of the inorganic types of mulches like the rocks or the larger river rocks. And you can create different pathways, different topographies in your landscape. Mulch also helps improve the soil. It helps with all those microorganisms that are underneath that mulch to keep them protected. It helps protect your plants from the heat. That soil surface can heat up pretty good, but if you use one of the organic mulches like the shredded bark there, that can keep the soil temperatures cooler. Keep in mind, this can go the other way. If you're going to use the rock mulches, it can actually make things a little hotter. So make sure your plants are appropriate for the type of mulch you're using. And then, one of the best things about mulch is that it inhibits weeds. And I don't know very many gardeners that like pulling weeds all the time. So you can also use mulch around your trees. Just make sure that you're doing it properly. You can apply it any time of year. About 3 to 4 inches if you're using the organic types of mulches, like the bark or the shredded cedar or whatever you choose to use that's organic. If you're using the inorganic mulches, you really don't need as much, just 1 to 2 inches. When you're mulching around your trees, you want to do this properly and make sure that you're not putting the mulch right up against the trunk of the tree in what we call a mulch volcano, as in the picture on the left or at the bottom there. There's gas exchange that happens at the base of that tree trunk where it needs to breathe. And if you pile a bunch of mulch up around it, it's gonna harm the tree and it's not gonna be able to breathe very well. So pull that back, maybe just a few inches, maybe 2 to 3 inches around the base of the tree. Make sure there's no mulch. Also, don't use plastic under your mulch. Landscape fabric is fine. It's ineffective over time, but if you want to use it, that's totally fine. It can help you out for a little while. But make sure that water can get through. I think one of my master gardeners is on here that was with me at one time. We went out for a visit, and they had used black plastic as a landscape fabric, and their huge trees were suffering from it. And so what you do when you have a plastic covering over the soil is you create an anaerobic environment where it's very low in oxygen, and the roots of those trees just suffer really badly. So no plastic under your mulch, please. And for more information on the mulches, you can check out, CSU has an entire fact sheet about that. So let's talk about plants. Back in 2002, Colorado Springs did a study where they compared traditional landscape plants with those that we have coined as xeric types of landscape plants. And they were seeing water savings up to 63% just by switching out your plant material. Natives tend to be on the top of the list for the xeric plants. They don't have to be native though. We've got a lot of other introduced plants that do really well in low water conditions and aren't invasive. But one good thing about natives is they also support the local fauna. So you're looking at native bees coming in when you plant some of these native plants. In this picture in front of you, you'll see blanket flower in the front there. That's the yellow plant. There's some Rocky Mountain penstemon, the blue spikes that are kind of popping up out of there. And then just behind that, you see that silvery looking foliage plant. That's a rabbit brush, and all of those are native to Colorado. And so please consider native plants. When trying to figure out what plants to put into your landscape, there are so many great resources out there for you. I want to direct you to Plant Select at plantselect.org. These are both native and introduced plants that have been research tested across a lot of different areas, and they do really well in our semi-arid Mountain West. Both introduced as well as natives. Resource Central is another good place to look at, especially here along the Front Range area around Denver up into Fort Collins. They offer what's called Garden in a Box, where you can just purchase a couple flats of plants that has a mixture already kind of put together with a design that goes with it for you to just kind of plop out into your yard that's low water use. So if you're a beginner, that's a great way to go. I just purchased one of these for my yard. Colorado Native Plant Society is fantastic. Online, they've got several different manuals and design ideas, and they're broken down by the different regions of Colorado. So you can get very specific to what works well for you. And then CSU, as usual, we have a ton of information on our website. We have xeric plant lists for trees and shrubs, as well as perennials, ground covers, you name it. We've got a lot of lists for you to look at. I don't have time because we only have an hour today to go through all the different plants that are great for low water use. So I picked some highlights, and I just want to show some pictures of what these low water plants can look like. And honestly, I don't think they look much different than plants that use a lot of water. It's just the thing is we're not familiar with them. So let's familiarize ourselves, shall we? So on the left side here, you'll see Kentucky coffee tree, a really great shade tree, pretty low water use, has nice fine foliage, yellow fall color, and some pods on it. But there are some male varieties that don't have the pods or the fruit, if that's not your thing. Russian hawthorn is more of a smaller tree for the landscape that's deciduous, gets beautiful white flowers in it in the spring, has nice yellow fall color, and then also has berries that provide food for our local fauna. You can go with some evergreen trees as well. Pinyon pine on the left-hand side there is a good choice for a dry area. Not a good choice for in the lawn. You'll notice that they've pulled the lawn back around this tree and they're not watering this tree like they're watering the lawn around it. Bristlecone pine, probably, I think is becoming one of my favorite my favorite evergreen trees. It's a slow grower, but I love the shape of it and it just looks so unique. And then junipers. There are so many junipers on the market now. You can get a standard Rocky Mountain juniper, which is in the left-hand picture. You can go columnar, like the Woodward columnar juniper in the right-hand picture, or maybe you want to add in some different color into your landscape. So you could do one of the blue junipers, like the Wichita blue in the bottom picture. There's shrubs that are xeric that you can put into your landscape. Pawnee Butte sand cherry is one that I have in my yard. I love it. It has pretty spring flowers, great fall color, and it's kind of a spreader. It's not real tall, but it spreads out about 6 feet. Skunk bush sumac, a nice rounded, larger shrub to fill in a larger area. Also has spectacular fall color, as you can see in the picture there. And then one that I don't see enough, I think, is rabbit brush in the landscape. I see it along I-25 because it's a native and it grows really well in Colorado, but it's also got a place in the landscape, and they're actually coming out with new varieties that are dwarf type. So the lower picture there is called dwarf baby blue rabbit brush, and it only gets to be a few feet wide and a few feet tall. So look into those for deciduous shrubs. We've got some evergreen shrubs that are also great for low water. The junipers, again, fill that niche for shrubs as well as trees. Panchito manzanita is a great evergreen, kind of a creeping, spreading shrub, low-growing shrub, pretty pink flowers. And if you're dealing with dry shade, which is a hard niche to fit, look at the Oregon grape holly. It does well in dry shade, has really pretty yellow flowers in the spring, and then puts on those berries and has some fall color. So it hits all of the marks for the dry shade. I don't have enough time to show you all of the perennials that are low water. So I'm going to highlight my big three. Penstemon on the left, salvia in the middle, and agastaki or agastaki on the right. Hyssop is another way to say that. What you'll notice when you look at this picture, all of these pictures in front of you, that these are all really pretty, very colorful. They all look kind of similar in shape and size and habit, and they bloom at different times a year. So if you can do a mixture of these, pick a few of each category, you can have blooms throughout the summer, spring, summer, even into fall, and have lots of color choices, and all of these are super low water use. There's ground covers out there as well. Like I mentioned, if you want to start to back off some of your grass and put in more drought tolerant ground covers, you can look into some of these. Creeping thyme, that on the left there, the top one is woolly thyme. The bottom one is red creeping thyme that flowers. Turkish veronica is also another great one. This one is a blue form. There's also some white or some mixed blue and white forms. And then ice plants. There are tons and tons and tons of different varieties of ice plants out there. A lot of these are featured in the Plant Select program. And they add lots of color, and I'm going to tell you, they bloom all summer long. So look into the ice plants for sure. And then ornamental grasses. I didn't pick out different ornamental grasses to show you because really almost all of the true ornamental grasses that are true grasses are going to be pretty low water use. So you can see in this picture here, there's tons of variety. Don't forget the succulents, turquoise tails blue sedum in the front picture there, or Perry's agave or red yucca. There's lots of very, very interesting succulents that maybe you aren't thinking of. They're not all cactuses. And then, you know, there are annuals as well that are low water use. So if you want to try out your hand at some cut flower gardens, try some annual rudbeckia or the globe amaranth, the straw flower. All three of these are fantastic low water use annuals. The globe amaranth and the straw flower also work well for dried flower arrangements, so they kind of have a dual purpose. So any questions, Allison? And then I'm just going to cover quickly the vegetable garden.
There is one about manzanita. I haven't grown this plant, but Joanna was wondering if you have any tips on getting it to grow. She did move it to a little more shade, but it's just not thriving.
Well, and this is a good time to mention that when you first plant any of these xeric plants, whether they're perennials or shrubs or whatever, you need to water them the first season to help them establish. So it could be that it's maybe not getting enough water to get it established. I don't know. It's hard to say without knowing more details about that particular plant. But I have seen Panchito manzanita grown in the hottest, driest spots, and it does really great. I'm not sure that doing it in the shade is gonna help much because they're really more sun loving.
Maybe if there's any master gardeners or those who've grown that plant, you could offer Joanna some advice in the chat.
Yes, or if Joanna wants to reach out to her local master gardeners through email, they might be able to help her pinpoint what exactly the issue is through pictures and discussion. Okay, lastly, today we're going to cover the vegetable garden. So this is that section that is never before seen. I just created this section, so you guys are getting it firsthand. So let's talk about the vegetable garden. How does water stress affect your vegetable garden? Well, really, your yield and your quality is directly related to how adequate your water supply is. And I will say this, vegetable gardens are not xeric. So they use a good amount of water, but there are things that you can do to make that water used more efficiently in that vegetable garden. A lot of our vegetables will have a strong flavor when they come under water stress. For example, carrots might start to get kind of a rancid taste to them, and that's because they start to get a buildup of oils as opposed to having more water content in that root. And then other landscape plants can usually handle a drought, but your vegetables cannot because they don't go dormant. Most of these are grown in tropical areas naturally, and then we bring them, to our Colorado high elevation, all that, and we try to grow them here, and they really do need water. So how can we do that? So let's talk about some of those water conserving techniques. The first one is to amend your soil if you haven't already done so. You want to be adding organic matter to your soil until you get to a point where you have about 4 to 5%. You can measure this through a soil test, and CSU does offer that service for around $35. And they'll tell you what your percent organic matter is, and you'll know if you need to add more. If you have sandy soils, once you add that organic matter to the soil, it's going to hold 10 times more water and nutrients than the sand did. So you can already see that the water that we're putting on is going to stick around for longer. On your clayey soils, the organic matter actually glues together these clay particles into larger aggregates or larger kind of clumps, and it increases pore space between those clumps. And you might be saying, well, I mean, that's great, but clay really holds a lot of water. Do I really want to add more airspace? Isn't that going to use more water? And the answer is no, because as you increase soil oxygen and increase that pore space, you're going to get better drainage, which then leads to, again, better drainage leads to deeper roots, and then your plants will grow deeper and be more drought tolerant. So it takes a while to get there, but it actually does conserve water. If you're using compost to amend your soil as your organic matter, rule of thumb, make sure it's plant-based, if you can, 2 to 3 inches per year into the top 6 to 8 inches of the soil. After a few years, you can start to back off of that because you'll probably have gotten to that 4 to 5% organic matter point. Real quickly, if you're going to use manure-based compost, I just want to mention this, make sure it's very well aged, at least several months. 4 months is kind of the minimum. And don't use fresh manure on your vegetable garden because of all kinds of other issues like E. coli and listeria and things like that. So make sure it's well aged or apply it in the fall, and not 2 to 3 inches. You only need 1 inch of animal-based compost that's very well composted. And the reason being is it's very high in salts. It can burn your plants, and again, it can harbor some pathogens that we don't like. So another water conserving technique you can use is drip irrigation. Use this drip irrigation in your garden. And also if you mulch on top of that with say straw or some other kind of mulch, you can reduce your water need in your vegetable garden by 50% because you are pinpointing the irrigation right to the base of the plants that need it. Set up a timer on this as well to water at the same time every morning or every other day. You can usually get away with only watering every other day if your plants are in the ground. If you're planting in raised beds, you're going to probably be watering more often, and that's just because of the evaporation is a little higher for raised beds. But set up a timer so that you're not overwatering. Another technique you can use is to plant in blocks rather than rows. This is going to help create shade for the roots, and it's going to cause less evaporation because you have less sun hitting the soil surface. Also, planting in this way can help control the weeds. And even if you're in rows, controlling those weeds use less water that way because the weeds just compete for the same water that the vegetables need. So if we get rid of the weeds, more water for the vegetables. Also consider grouping your plants with similar watering needs. Put your squashes together. Mine tend to need a little bit more water. Beans use a lot of water. Sweet corn uses a lot of water, whereas some other things might be able to handle a little bit of drought. And then protect your plants from the wind, your plants and your soil from the wind. This is gonna have less evaporation picked up by that wind. And then one thing that I tried this year is using shade cloth. I'm growing lettuce and tomatoes under my shade cloth, which is 30% shade cloth. And I have two beds right next to each other, one with shade cloth, one without. And I can say I water every morning, and I always water the one without the shade more than I water the one with the shade. So there's definitely some water savings happening with shade cloth. And we have a CSU fact sheet on water conservation specifically for the vegetable garden. And it also lists out all the different types of vegetables and talks about their critical watering periods. So I encourage you to look up that fact sheet. And then the last question that you might need to ask yourself is, how do I water the vegetable garden if we're under restrictions due to drought? I hope it never looks like the picture there, but if we do go under watering restrictions, maybe you can only water twice per week. You should not have a major effect on your plants if you're growing in the ground. Just water more deeply on those days that you are allowed to water. Implement all those water saving techniques that I mentioned, like mulching and shade cover, taking out the weeds. Again, watering deeply when you can. Grow what you need. So if we start to get into a drought situation, you might start to have to kind of play triage with your plants and say, you know, you're just not worth it, beans, because you use way too much water. I'm going to stick with, you know, maybe the lettuces don't use as much water because they have shallow root systems. So you don't have to really do a lot of deep watering. Or tomatoes can actually handle a little bit of drought, but you might end up running into some blossom end rot issues there. So start to think about, what can you handle in the drought? What do you need to grow? And your container plants, I have, in my experience, my containers need to be watered every single day. So if you're restricted to twice a week, your container plants are probably going to suffer. If your outdoor watering is completely prohibited, then you're not going to be planting a vegetable garden that year. And it's really hard to plan for that, I know. But if we go under restrictions where they just say no watering, you're just going to have to say goodbye to that vegetable garden for the year. So anyway, vegetable gardens are not xeric. So that's it for today's class. Any overall questions that we had come in, Allison?
I answered the couple that came in. I do want to remind people of our classes on Fridays that will be starting next week on the 21st of August. Maybe if Amy is savvy, she can pull that up again. I also do want to thank Amy for this presentation. It was absolutely awesome. A lot of great information covering all facets of the landscape. And I'm just waiting to see, Amy, if there are other questions coming in, and either people are fully saturated, or they are still typing things in. Oh, here's one from Joan.
Yeah.
In the winter, we've had elk who like to hang out. Any tips on protecting trees and shrubs? So this could be for elk, voles, rabbits, or
Yes.
deer. So general animal prevention tips.
So there was actually a big conversation that happened on our pest serve listserv that a bunch of us are on about this very question. There's not a lot of research out there to give you scientifically backed research to say this is what you do for your elk. So people were throwing around a lot of homemade ideas, and people use pepper sprays, like some kind of a Tabasco sauce in water and spray it around, and maybe that'll help deter them from wanting to munch on things. Irish soaps, and was mentioned, hanging Irish spring soap around the area. It's a hard one because elk, they're much bigger than these plants, so you can't really, even if you put a cage over them, they can just stomp the cage and eat the plant. So it's a really hard one. Allison, you got any thoughts on that? Keeping the elk away? And I know there's not much you can do because I think they're protected. You kind of have to let them make their migration.
Yeah, it was a good year for elk in Loveland. 8-foot fences can work. That's what they do up in Estes for the deer and elk. But fencing can help, at least it's a deterrent. But I think it is what it is. It's just something you have to learn to live with. And elk will browse like deer and rabbits. They'll try most anything. So there's not even like elk-proof plants. So hopefully your neighbor's yard will become more appetizing than yours, Joan.
Yeah, there you go. All right.
I don't see any other questions. As always, you are welcome to contact your local extension office or your local agent. Again, Amy is in Weld County. I'm in Larimer County. We both have active Master Gardener programs, and they would love to help you out with any of your gardening questions. And if you can join us next Friday at noon, we'd love to see you. I should do that, didn't I? Next Friday, and those are posted on the cohorts blog website. So at the bottom of the screen, you can see that csuhort.blogspot.com. Click on gardening webinars, get yourself registered, and learn something new this fall. So, Master Gardener applications, that's going to be a county by county decision. And so you will have to check with your local county office to decide or to see what they are doing for the fall, because all of us are operating in county policies. So I would just encourage you to reach out to your local county office. So.
Great.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Amy, and thanks, everybody. And we will see you again soon.
Thank you, everyone.